It's another Wednesday and another episode of Speak Out. I'm your host, Christine Yeargin, and today's episode is probably one of my favorites, for sure one of my favorites, if not my favorite. It's one I've been waiting to release since we recorded it several weeks ago. I'm really excited. You know, we're no stranger to talking about excuse me, can't even say the word, controversial subjects over here. And today's subject is no exception. We're talking about pornography, which is a very serious topic. It affects people all over the world, especially in our country. It does not have a specific gender that it targets, although more males watch pornography than females, but there are females who watch it. And I think that's so important to share because it's not just men who watch it. We need to be sharing this episode with men and women, our friends, our family, whoever we can, anybody we know who struggles with it. But it affects people all over the country, all over the world, and in ways that you wouldn't even maybe put two and two together. You know, you think you watch pornography and that's kind of the end of it, but it's not. Pornography fuels sex trafficking, which then fuels the abortion industry. And there are people who are trafficked every single day who are put into these scenarios, and it's not okay. And not only that, but pornography affects us mentally, physically, emotionally. It affects us in negative ways. And it's something that, you know, people shy away from talking about, but we need to be having these conversations. The more controversial a subject is, the more I think we should probably be talking about it and having those hard conversations and talking to people who know what they're talking about, which today's guest, I'm so excited that he was willing to jump on. He actually, I don't love leading with this, but the reason we're having him on, among other things, is because he is so open and so bold to tell people, hey, I used to have a former porn addiction, and this is who I used to be, and I left that shame in the past, and I am no longer that person anymore, and I'm here to tell people that you don't have to keep watching pornography. Here's what it did to me, here's how it affected me, and here's how I broke free. And I love that he is so unapologetic in sharing his story and just willing for everyone to hear it and learn from, because this is one of those subjects where people kind of, you know, even if they struggled with pornography, they don't want to tell you about it, or they don't want to talk about it, or even if they had an addiction and maybe they don't watch it anymore, they still don't want to talk about it because it's an embarrassing thing to talk about. But we need those people who are willing to stand up and say, hey, I've watched pornography and this is what it did to me, and this is why we don't need to be watching it anymore. Or, you know, not just the pornography subject, but hey, I've had an abortion and here's what it did to me. It hurt me, and here's how, and here's the regret, and here's the side effects that I had that they don't want you to know. Do you think the porn industry wants you to know the side effects of porn or the way that it affects vulnerable people all over the world? No. Like, one of the most lucrative businesses there is, with pretty much no restrictions around it. I'm so glad today's guest is Christian Watson. He's coming on to talk about that. He's one of the coolest guys. Literally, when you look up cool in the dictionary, it's probably his picture next to it. I can't even do an intro that would do him justice. He does videography, he does photography, he does branding. He works with brands all over the world. He worked with Students for Life and did a special merch line for us, which is phenomenal. You guys should go check it out. Actually, my husband even loves it and wears it. So it's not just a male or female line. It's pretty much anybody can wear it, and it's super cool. Like, cool is an understatement. I don't know a word that's cooler than cool that would really describe it, but he does vintage everything, collects antiques, has a store where he sells really cool vintage stuff, makes really cool things as well, just lives a lifestyle that's pretty awesome for the most part, kind of off-grid in a place in Australia that's like, it looks like a scene out of Jurassic Park. I mean, really the coolest. And hearing his story is so intriguing and educational, and I just learned so much from him. So I'm really excited for you guys to hear from him, hear him talk about this controversial subject, and hear even some of the statistics that we bring up and how it affects today's youth. It's not even just youth though, but how it affects today's culture as a whole, and what we can really be doing about it. You guys, Christian Watson. Okay, today I am so excited to have Christian Watson on. If the dictionary had a picture next to the definition of cool, Christian Watson would be it. Thank you so much for joining us, Christian.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be here.
I appreciate it. So you live like literally the coolest life. You're in Australia. It's 3:30 here my time. At 7:30 a.m. your time. You're off the grid. How do you go from the United States to living in Australia off the grid?
Oh yeah, it's pretty interesting story actually. Our business 1924 was based in Portland, Oregon, and we were happy to be there for the time we were. My wife Ellie and I were traveling through Scotland, and she had a visa, just on a tourist visa where you're allowed to stay 3 months in the United States. During that time, you're allowed to kind of travel and then come back in. Basically, it kind of resets that tourist visa. But we were in Scotland and about to order a plane when they told her she wouldn't be allowed back into the United States. So I had to leave her in
Wow.
Scotland, which was really, really tough. And as soon as I got back to my house in Portland, it was just kind of one of those moments of like, well, this isn't where my life is. My life is with her. And so she went back to Australia and I followed. We ended up moving our whole lives in 2018 to Australia, to Queensland. We're on the Sunshine Coast. It's really beautiful here. It is, if you can imagine Portland, Oregon as being dreary and wet and cold, where we live is the exact opposite of that. It is sunshine and lots of, it's just crazy in comparison. So we ended up moving here about 4 years ago, and yeah, just recently started doing an off-grid build with her parents. So we're doing a multi-generational living situation, which is really fun. Yeah, and it's just been a chaotic experience, but we're very happy, and it's been definitely a ride.
That's awesome. I cannot imagine being in the airport with someone that you love and told that you basically have to go separate ways. And good on her, because if my husband did that, I'd be like, nope, you can't, you have to stay. You
Yeah,
can't leave. There's no way. That must have been super, super hard.
yeah, it was. It was a bit of a shock to the system, I think, because we had to board the plane in about 15 minutes from the time that we were told, and so we were kind of scrambling, like, well, what do we what do we do? Sort of like what are we gonna do here? And so she ended up extending her stay in Europe for some time and then ended up going back. But that left me about 30 days to organize a container to be shipped overseas and sell my cars. And it was just a whole it was yeah, an adventure is probably putting it mildly. And looking back, like I, I was really grateful that I was able to approach it with the mindset I had because I wasn't stressed at all. But I think that was because I was given a lot of grace and a lot of patience to kind of
Right.
tackle it all. So really grateful for that. But yeah, it was definitely not easy.
I can only imagine. So you do a ton of cool things. So when I go to your page, I feel like there's always something new. You do branding, you do design, you have your own shop, you're a business owner. And when somebody asks you like, "Hey Christian, what do you do for a living?" How do you describe it?
Yeah, it's a fun conversation
It's
that comes up. Because yeah, you're right. I mean, we're very multifaceted, and so I typically just say we run a creative agency, and if there's anything needed creatively from anybody, and they come to us, I say we can do it, and I'll figure out how to, you know, provide it, even if I don't know how to do something. It's something I want to learn how to do. So yeah, I would say we're just a creative agency. I try to simplify it as much as I can and then expand upon it. Obviously, we do a lot of artwork, do a lot of illustration and design work, branding and packaging, and then we do photography, a lot of product photography, lifestyle. Then we do videography and video content creation, and then we do product development, and it's just it goes on and on and on. And
so there's basically
um,
nothing you don't do. You do it all.
that's that's right. Yeah, that's what I try to set ourselves up as. You know, we've always kind of said, hey, we're journeymen here, meaning that not people who go on adventures, but people in like a carpentry trade when they're called journeymen, they're people who are constantly learning. They're not perfect. They're not masters of anything, and so we're able to say that we're kind of like jacks of all trades, but we're journeymen in that way because we're always trying to learn how to do something better.
Cool. That's so awesome. And speaking of your designs, I'm actually wearing one of them. The people listening can't see it, but if anybody's watching, they'll be able to see it. This is a collab that you did with Students for Life, and it
Yeah.
says, no tolerance for injustice, and kind of small, it says anti abortion. And there is what animal would you say this is?
Yeah, it's a Japanese
Forgive me.
tiger. Yeah, it's a Japanese
Okay.
tiger. Yeah.
So what is your I mean, I'm looking at it upside down too, and I
Yeah.
that's what I would have said was a tiger, but I wanted to be 100% sure. What
Yeah.
was your inspiration behind the design for this specific piece?
Yeah, so I kind of feel as though we're living in a culture, especially when it comes to things and topics like abortion, where one side is allowed to be vehemently outspoken, and the other side is not allowed the ability to speak. And I think it kind of reminded me of a caged animal, someone who feels like they're trapped and, they've got something really important to say, but they're not being allowed to say it. And it was kind of like that idea of like, I'm bursting out of here and this is what I'm saying. This is what's important, needs to be said is that, we don't tolerate injustice. And even if the world accepts something as normal, doesn't necessarily mean that it is so. Um, and yeah, so that's really kind of the inspiration that came to me. And I remember drawing it. I was like, well, this is kind of intense. And I was like, but the truth is, it's easy for me to sit at my desk and to draw pictures, but I have to think about how someone will interpret the design of it and how they will relate to it. And though I may not be someone who's ever experienced the situation of dealing with abortion and all of the minutia that comes with that, but I knew that I wanted to allow for the depth of the emotion and the intensity of it to come out because even in online conversations, you can feel the intensity coming from both sides. And people who are both for and against it are both very outspoken. And yeah, I just feel like there's not a lot of cheerleading on the pro-life side of things, and I wanted to make sure that this was kind of my like, here we go, we got a mascot, that's that sort of thing.
I love it. And I love that you put anti-abortion instead of pro-life because
Correct.
people say you're not pro-life, you're just anti-abortion. And yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's exactly what we are. We're anti-abortion. They think it's an insult, but it's not.
yeah, yeah. I also think that there's so much nuance in language, and branding language is very, very important. And even for little things like that, I mean, you think right wing, left wing, those little phrases that put people in boxes, pro-life, anti, pro-choice, whatever it is, those things put people in boxes that aren't necessarily indicative of what the movements represent. And I think anti-abortion sums it up so clearly. We're against abortion. I mean, it sounds like we're being radical. It's actually to me, which is so funny. It's the least radical thing that you can be, in my opinion. And yeah, I, I could go on about it, but yeah, it just makes sense. It makes sense to say that.
Well, that's what we're here for. Go on and on. So I was doing a ton of research on you, and you are one of the most fascinating people, truly. And I know you're very humble, and that's probably something you're gonna laugh about and blush at, maybe. But
Yeah.
you once deleted an Instagram that had over 700,000 followers on it. Why did you do that? Most people in today's day and age, they're all over social media. That's all they want. They want followers. They want the fame that comes with the followers. And you had the ability to say, I have 700,000 followers, but click, I'm going to delete this.
Yeah. So there was a lot of little moments that led me up to that point. And they were not great moments. I was really struggling at this time. I was an atheist, and I was living a life that most people would see from the outside and be like, "Oh my goodness, it's so cool what you do, and you're really successful. You must be doing so well." And simultaneously, I'd be going to sleep, and I would not be able to sleep. I had massive anxiety, panic attacks, depression. And so while I was doing, amazingly by what the world's standards were, I was really struggling internally. And I remember I was first explaining this to my now wife, Ellie, and she, couldn't have cared less about social media, though she is on it. She doesn't get involved with it the way that I did. I mean, everything I do with 150% intensity and competition. I'm super interested in growth and, trying to build things. And so for me to get to that stage and have that sort of following, I was really proud and really excited about everything that was going on in my life on one hand, and then on the other hand, in the dark, I was really struggling, obviously. So when I had explained to her I was thinking about deleting, she was kind of shrugging her shoulders. She's like, okay, like it's not that big of a deal, that sort of thing. And to me, I'm like, yes, it is. It's such a big deal. But you just realize, I think, being in the social media world, just how reliant and involved we are. And I could go into how, social media now is really affecting adolescents and how we know that and how we have, scientific proof of it. And, the depression, the addiction, it's overwhelming. And I think I realized I was like, okay, does this thing own me or do I own it? Like, am I answering to Instagram, which is such a silly thing? I mean, it's one social media of many now, and it's on the kind of on the downslope. So it's just one of those things that at the time, this is back in 2017, I believe. And I just said to myself, I was like, I cannot live my life under the guise that this is what defines me. I didn't want it to define my work. I didn't want it to define my personality, and it had started doing that. And so when I deleted, wasn't like I deactivated it and like hid it away for a little bit. Like I full on got rid of it. And the amount of people, and this is not even a slide or anything, Christine, but the amount of people who have, commended me on deleting Instagram or thought it was cool or brought it up actually shows me in this world just how much we're putting this value on social media when in
How
reality,
addicted we are.
yeah, we all think like you're right, this is like such a grandiose gesture to delete this thing. And I'm like, I have some pretty amazing influential people in my life who have, completely gotten rid of all their social media and gotten rid of all their smartphones. And um, I think I'm now living sort of like a in between life where I use social media only for the things that I find important. Whereas at the time, because I was, the way I was living, I was a little bit scared. I wasn't really confident in who I was, even though I had a massive following. I wasn't using it for anything other than like validating my own sort of whininess, if that makes sense. Whereas, that would probably be my one big regret is if I could look back and go back, I would probably use it to speak out against some pretty important topics the way that I use our platform now. Um, but yeah, it was the best decision of my life, deleting it, because you immediately feel this sense of freedom. I think I slept so well that night, just feeling like I was kind of a different person and I didn't owe anybody anything. You just don't realize how much you get into this algorithmic way of thinking. Oh, I've got to create today. I've got to post today. I've got to, sort of appease the masses and my following to keep growing. It really is. It's a dopamine affected platform, like most social media these days. And a lot of people don't realize it. It's you have to intentionally go to see it. And when you call it out for that, a lot of people will be like, just get off your phone and it, but you don't realize, I think, just how deeply ingrained it is in your daily life until you take it out. It's like trying to quit smoking. I mean, I really would find the comparative accurate.
Right. And you're completely right about that. It's an addiction. I have struggled with social media. I have a love-hate relationship with it. I use it for a lot of pro-life activism, and I use it to rally moms, or excuse me, pro-life individuals to help moms who are in unplanned
Mm,
pregnancies. And I love it for that aspect, but I hate it for the reason that it sometimes I find myself comparing myself to other people or seeing what other people are doing, or oh, their house looks like this, or there's
yeah.
so many different things about social media that are not great, and there are good things too, and I think you probably would agree with that. Now, you deleted your Instagram, you have a new one now, and you've already gained hundreds of thousands of followers already again, so I mean, people just flock to you naturally, and you're very bold on Instagram with what you say. And on Instagram, you called porn a crime against humanity. I want to dive into that a little bit and what you meant by pornography being a crime against humanity.
Yeah, and it's not a light phrase. I started watching pornography when I was about 14 years old. I'm 30 now. This will be my fifth year free of pornography, which is awesome. Feels great.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But I realize how so many people, and this is the thing, is Though I'm 30 now, so I'm not super old, but I'm, past that age of sort of being at the peak of social media. I have seen and been involved in watching from behind the scenes all of the memification culture that exists on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, Reddit, wherever. And I see the things that people normalize with pornography, whether it's on social media or in movies or in television. Everywhere you look, pornography exists, and it exists as triggers, and it exists for, in my opinion, the sole purpose of destroying family structure, destroying relationships, destroying mental health. Um, there's no other reason on earth that I can imagine pornography being free. Which, if I was a child and I walked into a store to buy cigarettes, I get carded. If I walk into it to buy alcohol, I get carded. To buy a gun, I get carded. To buy anything that is illegal for anybody under the age of 18, which porn is, I get carded. So it's interesting now that pornography has this infinite access to children, especially where now we are seeing, the age of access in children, especially young boys, is 8 to 11. Um, I have a hard time imagining that in 8 years I'm going to have to talk to my son about pornography. And I don't have the hard time because I think talking about it's wrong. In fact, it's the opposite. And just like the tiger with the anti-abortion, I wouldn't consider what I'm doing bold. I just feel like pornography. I feel like abortion. I feel like things that are attacking people on a human level are so allowed to exist and be outspoken that all I'm trying to do is counteract that and be outspoken in the opposite. And for some people, it's really hard. But for me, it feels like a sense of duty because I was a kid once and I wish I had someone who reached over my shoulder and said, hey, what are you watching? And do you feel like you should be watching that? And so I really see this attack on children with pornography and the normalization of it, and everyone using it. No one It's just such an interesting thought that we don't get mad. Like if this, excuse me if this sounds crass, I don't mean to, but it just is important that I can illustrate, to the listeners here, kind of my way of thinking for this. If a man walks into your house and exposes himself to your children, your first reaction is, I have to stop this. This man is not allowed in my house. We have to get him out. But the fact that pornography is allowed to do that on social media and is not held accountable is so grossly under attacked, in my opinion, like in social aspects. So few people are comfortable talking about it. So few, there's some weird stigma about it, about pornography, that maybe everyone's used it once or twice. Not everybody's addicted. Maybe some people just think like, oh, it's just something you watch. It's people are consenting on the other side. There's no way to verify any of that. But it just goes to prove to me that pornography is something that continuously eludes social pressure, and it continuously is given a pass in media where it's allowed to thrive and, in my opinion, attack the innocent people, mostly
Yeah.
including children.
Wow. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I want to, for a lot of people who are listening, because this is such a tough topic and not a lot of people are willing to speak out about it, I wanted to read some statistics, if you don't mind, so that the
Yeah.
listeners of people watching can hear kind of the effects and how powerful the pornography industry is. Um, as far as users go, 1 in 3 Americans seek out pornography at least once a month. Young adults 18 to 24 are the most frequent consumers, and almost 6 in 10 young adults seek out porn either daily, weekly, or monthly. There's another report that says 68% of young men and 18% of young women view porn weekly. I think that's something that a lot of women don't talk about. Obviously, men consume it at a much higher rate, but women do as well. And as far as search engines go, 30% of data transferred across the internet is porn.
Mm.
30% of data transferred across the internet is porn. That's crazy to me. Google is the leading search engine of choice. 83.48% of all global adult site internet traffic originates there, probably because it's one of the most well-known search engines. And porn websites get more unique visitors than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. That to me is wild. Pornography produces the effects on the brain similar to illegal drugs. And those who are addicted experience withdrawal symptoms if they stop watching porn. And symptoms can include anxiety, depression, mood swings, insomnia, lack of confrontation, and loss of libido. Porn isn't just damaging to men, it's damaging to women. And the things that we're seeing here is showing that it's as addictive as drugs. And you actually experience withdrawal symptoms when you stop. Now, you're a former addict. You've been 5 years clean from watching porn. And I'm curious, what was it that made you want to stop? And not only what made you want to stop, but what made you want to speak out about it too? Because I know there's a lot of people who are very scared to speak out about it. There's some sort of stigma in talking about it. And I think it's so admirable that you do. I know you don't. I think you think it's just very normal that you talk about it, but the rest of the world doesn't see it that way. And we need more men speaking up about it.
Yeah, there's a few factors here that have played in over time. And, you know, if to be frank, the reasons for me stopping are not solely on because one day I had some massive awakening. It was, yay, I'm going to be better. It actually had a lot to do with the way porn teaches you in the mind of what's acceptable. And you'll read stories, horror stories of children who see something in pornography and act it out with their young girlfriends or young partners. And, you know, it can be extremely violent. Something like 60% of all online pornography involving a woman involves violence to some degree. So there's this whole stigma of, you know, we have this massive use of pornography among the Me Too movement at the same time. You know, we have these two things kind of simultaneously coexisting, and yet they're the antithesis of each other, and they're quite quiet about how they affect one another. And for me, I was really just not a great person to many of the women that I had dated prior to my relationship with Ellie, and even to my, you know, with Ellie, I was unfaithful, and we struggled with my being sort of, you know, obviously unfaithful and cheating. And when we had gone through that, it sort of came to a head where I was on the floor. I remember it's a little dramatic, but I was just really freaking out because at this stage I hadn't deleted my Instagram yet, and I kind of was built on this haughty sort of stature where I was like, oh, I'm this great person, and here's the whole world is accepting me. Although 700,000 people isn't the whole world, you kind of have that, you know, illusion in your head. You're like, all these
Sure.
people accept me, even though they don't know who I am. Surely they, you know, then I'm not doing anything incorrectly, right? And so I was just in my head like a delusional person, seriously delusional, and telling myself that I hadn't done anything wrong. And I kid you not, I was on the floor and I hear this voice. And the only thing I can equate it to is the voice of God just telling me, you are wrong. That's all, 3 words, you are wrong. And immediately I was hit with this peace that I was wrong. I mean, I wasn't happy that I was wrong. I was just kind of happy to have someone call me out because I had never had that before. And when I went and, you know, started talking to Ellie, who then flew back home from Oregon, she's like, you know, we're done. We're finished with this. I understood right then and there my mission wasn't to try to convince Ellie to stay in a relationship with me or to work it out. It was for me to figure out what was wrong with me that would allow this life to get to that stage. And I started to do some massive deconstructing and introspection, and, you know, found out, you know, hey, dude, this is something that you've accepted as normal for so long, is using pornography. And little by little, and I don't recommend this if if you're going through something similar, because there's a lot of shame involved with pornography and pornography use, and I don't want anybody listening to this who uses pornography to feel ashamed, because shame is something that keeps you in a cycle of use. But really, I had a point of conviction, and that's a lot different than shame. It's a lot different than guilt. Conviction is sort of the drive to do better, and knowing that something's wrong, and not allowing yourself to be like, oh, I'm such a bad person, So I didn't have that mindset. I was like, I got to figure this out because I obviously don't want to hurt people. I didn't really think I had turned off the empathy part of my brain using porn for as long as I had, for about 10 years. And I went to church, I went to counseling and to therapy, and every time that, I sort of had a resurgence of something come up in my mind that I knew I had to tell or kind of get out, I would explain it to Ellie and say, Ellie, I've used porn probably every day for like, the past however many years, and, even during our relationship. So it was just this, it was really cathartic for me. And this is what I don't recommend, is your partner should never be accountable for you. They can be there for you, but they should never be the person that you have to answer to, because it kind of puts them in a position of like, uh, you know, they're still emotionally invested, and you're over here like, hey, things are a lot better for me now because this is what I'm overcoming. And while it can be good, it was just one of those. It was a learning curve, and I look back on it, and I can only imagine how hard it was on Ellie. And as we've grown together and we've started to talk about these things publicly, we did a testimony on YouTube about our experience. And it's hard for me not to sit in the background and feel like a little puppy dog, who's like, I did something bad and I'm such a bad person. But I realize that that's not what we're meant to do. And that's why I want to use my experience as something that can relate to people. I'm not like someone who overcame this overnight and then all of a sudden is like some glorious mastermind on pornography. It was a lot of learning, and I didn't realize, like drugs, there's so many little steps that take you to where you're going. And I remember probably about 2 years into my porn sobriety, we got invited to go to a sex trafficking organization called One Child Matters, and they basically go do massive works in hard to reach places all around the world. And we went to Cebu, which is one of the sex trafficking capitals of the world. And I remember we went to see a rescue shelter where all of these young teenagers and preteens, and girls as young as 2 years old who had been pulled from sex trafficking. And we were sitting at the table, having breakfast in our hotel. We're kind of like a crew of influencers, invited on this trip. And we're sitting around and people are like, oh, these monsters who buy these children. And I'm sitting around looking and I'm thinking to myself, it's actually really, it's not that simple, in my opinion. I don't think people are born monsters, which would be a lot easier for us to sort of just be happy with. But I think abuse begets abuse, hurt people hurt people. I think people who use pornography little by little, and I would guarantee you every sex trafficking buyer in the world is someone who uses pornography to some extent. Not any one person just wakes up and abuses somebody. I think pornography is one of those tools that trains people to turn off their empathy and to little by little move towards committing violent or criminal acts that result in people being hurt. And then, so often you see sort of these almost soulless mugshots of people being arrested for, all sorts of sexual violence. And people are like, oh my gosh, look at this scumbag, look at this person. I'm like, I just see someone who's so far gone from the ability to empathize and from the ability to, their whole purpose in life is to serve themselves. And that's what porn teaches you to do, is to be so self-servant so self-serving that you completely negate anybody else's feelings. And I'll tell you, that is one of the hardest blowbacks, was coming back and reinstituting my empathy as a person. and looking around and looking behind me at what sort of the damage I'd left in the wake of myself. And so when I hear, I'm very grateful for all of the kind words I get now, but there's still that part of me that's like, I'm on a journey to always do better, and I want to help other people. And if I can stop by bringing awareness, anybody else going through a similar hurt, I would be very, very happy.
Wow. I so appreciate your vulnerability, because I know for you, it may be easy now because you've opened up and you talk to people about this fairly consistently, especially on social media. But for a lot of men, it's hard to open up and be vulnerable. I mean, even to their wives, it's hard. And part of that is probably shame. And you mentioned the connection to porn and sex trafficking, and a lot of people don't make that connection, or they don't think about it in that way, but there is a connection there. And not only is there a connection there, but there's a connection from sex trafficking to forced and coerced abortions. So it all kind of is like this vicious cycle. I have a couple more statistics that I was researching, and it said there are anywhere from 14,000 to 17,500 women being trafficked into the American sex trade every year. So that's just America, 14,000 to 17,500 women every year. Those who are actors in pornographic material are often women who have been sex trafficked, and sometimes child sex slaves, some of the most vulnerable members of our society. U.S. citizens account for 83% of all sex trafficking victims who have been found in this country, and victims of sex trafficking are subjected to physical mistreatment and are often forced to recreate pornographic scenes. So there's this connection, and sex traffickers often use pornography to groom victims of sex trafficking. And then women and children who are shown pornography by their traffickers to train before they're sold for sex. I mean, this connection it's wild to me. Like you said, somebody using porn doesn't necessarily think that they are contributing to sex trafficking, or then again to abortion. But there's a survey that says, in a survey of 66 women who have been sex trafficked, about 71% reported that they became pregnant, and at least once while being trafficked, about 21% said they had 5 or more pregnancies while being trafficked. So the majority of them only had 1 pregnancy. 21% said that they had at least 5 pregnancies. And over half of the women in the survey had at least 1 abortion, and nearly 30% reported they had multiple abortions. Among the 66 women, 114 abortions happened.
Wow.
So it's strange, when I say porn fuels abortion, people are like, no, it doesn't. What are you talking about? Or porn fuels sex trafficking. No, it doesn't. What are you talking about? But it really does. And you saw it firsthand with your own eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you see, and you can go back to a lot of poverty. You can go back to a lot of the way the world treats minorities, and, make a lot of connections. But at the end of the day, as someone in the West who consumed pornography on a daily basis, and someone who now is out of it and sees the glamorization of the use of pornography. If you think of TV shows like Euphoria or Game of Thrones, things that we pass off as entertainment that really actually allude to this culture of grooming younger audiences. And if you control the youth from a young age, again, with this free, addictive, very addictive drug, you're able to sort of push a lot of your ideals as well. And a lot of people would look at porn and not think twice about it. And let me tell you, when you stop looking at porn and you look back, your first thought is, oh my goodness, how much of what I saw was consensual? And there's zero way to know. Zero way.
Wow.
So was I an accessory to viewing a crime? And if I was in person and that was happening, I would be arrested. But if I'm watching it over the internet and there's no way to tell, I have to live with that for the rest of my life. And a lot of people will do everything in their power to convince themselves that what they're watching is acceptable. And if it's on the internet, it must be consent. But we know firsthand that so much of what is on the internet is not consented. Even feel good videos of a homeless person on the side of the street, someone bringing them a bag of food, and they're secretly being filmed. There's so much that we have no idea is being shared at any moment, and it's for entertainment value only. Um, and I think that that's probably one of the scarier facts about pornography is it's got this ability to keep people in perpetuated shame forever, which just makes people just continue to use it. Oh, I've already done something bad, might as well keep doing it. And it's like the hardest, it's like the number one tactic, in my opinion, that the enemy or whoever you want to call it uses is to keep us consuming something, is just this idea that, well, you've already committed a mistake, why not just continue to?
Yeah, that's, I think a lot of people do feel that way. Like, well, I've already done it once. What's the harm in doing it again? I've
Yeah.
already, and it's that way with a lot of things, not just pornography, drinking, or, maybe they were trying to get sober and they already drank once and they're like, oh, well, whatever, I'm back on the bandwagon, or I'm going to start drinking again. Or, I'm on a diet and I binged some Doritos. I'm going to totally give up and just, I don't think pornography is the only thing that we're conditioned to do that with. I think it's a lot of things.
Yes.
And I want to mention there was one other thing that I found really interesting in this study, bringing pornography back to the abortion talk here. There was one victim in the study of 66 women, and she notes that in her 6 abortions, she was under serious pressure from her pimps to abort babies. And there's another survivor who was abused at the hands of her trafficked, and she said that she had a total of 17 abortions, some of which were forced upon her.
Mm.
17 abortions. I mean, that's got to be a lot to live with. And for her, whoever pressured her to have those abortions, I mean, I can't even imagine. Obviously, we know all life is valuable. You've opened up yourself about your wife experiencing a miscarriage
Mm.
a few years ago. Do you think that is what solidified your beliefs in your pro-life beliefs and understanding the humanity of babies, or was it before that? Or tell me a little bit about how you came to your pro-life beliefs.
Yeah. Oh man, I had heard about miscarriage. Sorry, is the rain in the background really loud? It's really raining here, so I just want to make sure
Oh, I
that.
hear it. I do.
Yeah, is it too intense? I can move in.
No, no, you're fine.
Okay.
I
Um,
miss the rain.
yeah, it's nice.
I'm in Colorado. We don't have very much.
Oh yeah, just a lot of snow. Um, yeah, so man, miscarriage, well, again, one of those things that Hollywood kind of downplays. And because of that, I had this idea of miscarriage that I think was quite skewed. Um, and Ellie, and I know she wouldn't mind if I shared this story, but it is a pretty intense story. I had worked really a long day that day, and she started miscarrying in the middle of the night, and she couldn't wake me up. She couldn't call out to me because she didn't have the energy, so she was like whispering, like in your dream when you're trying to scream out and you can't. So it was like
Yeah.
this really crazy intense. I woke up finally about 5 a.m. because Ellie wasn't in her normal position. And I was like, "Oh, this is weird." She was curled up at the end of the bed, and she's like, I don't feel well. And this is after we had literally this sounds like a movie itself, actually. The day before, Ellie was spotting a bit. And so we had gone in to, do an ultrasound. And the ultrasound came back good. A little heart was going off. And, it's like, oh, this is great. He's beating, like, okay. Oh, we were kind of like a little bit relieved, spotting
Yeah.
happens, you read about it, whatever. And then, yeah, that next day, she began miscarrying in the middle of the night. And she asked me for some water or something, and I walked into the kitchen, and I just knew in my gut. I was like, we're gonna. I don't think we're gonna keep. Like, I don't think he's gonna make it. And we would have been about 10, 11 weeks into it, so it was pretty hard because we were excited. This was a couple years ago now, and I think that drive there and Ellie miscarrying, and just seeing the pain she went through, which is so similar to childbirth, um, and then the kind of quiet drive home, you just sort of realize that the value of life is not determined by you. It's like you realize it's like this intrinsic thing that exists without your consent, which is really beautiful. And I don't think we realized how much we were attached, not to the idea of having a child, but to the child that was in LA. And understanding that there's a myriad of reasons miscarriages happen. But yeah, I would say that that helped me understand a little bit better why life was so important and why it was so worth holding on to. And I really value everything now. She went on to have a couple more miscarriages actually before we had our son
So sorry.
Alaska, and it was definitely rough. It's not uncommon. Not that that makes it any easier, but just in case anybody's gone through it and wants to hear it, like we definitely, it was a struggle, but we overcame. And it's yeah, definitely one of those things that just kind of wakes you up. You're like, oh yeah, life is when it's your own. Yeah, I don't know. There's so much about it. There's so many things around surrounding it. But for me, it definitely was one of the first times that I was able to really empathize and understand the innocence of something so pure. Um, and I just realized, hey, uh, let, the truth is Ellie and I, we've been pro life, anti-abortion for quite some time, most of our lives, and um, for us to speak out against pornography, there's almost, because of its acceptance, there's almost like a little bit less of a fight. The people using pornography, they're not necessarily on the side of justice. They don't feel like they deserve the right to look at pornography. There are some, but most people are like, oh yeah, I can see what you're talking about. It's not as black and white, I think, as anti-abortion and abortion is. Which is literally life and death. That's just as simple as I can put it. And even with this project of working together, I was like, "Oh, Ellie, we're hope you're ready. We're gonna get some flack."
Did
And
you?
yeah, yeah. I mean, we always, yeah, definitely lost job opportunities, which was funny. It was the first time I've
I'm
ever had
sorry.
that. No, no, no. It's okay, because it's one of those things that I know that God brought me back to this position for this exact reason. That everything that I do now is reflective of, in my opinion, I'm a Christian, obviously, is reflective of that purpose in my life. And so when we spoke out about this, there was a lot of friends, a lot of people who were like, "Oh, you guys are like this, of course, makes sense. 1924, you're old school. You probably think hitting a woman's okay." So you get like a whole bunch of like the sort of, again, the memification culture that is actually so lacking in compassion and empathy because it's self-taught to be that way. And then we have all of these people who are just so suicidal, so depressive, so anxious, but then they're not empathizing with even themselves. Of course, they're going to be belligerent towards other people. And anyway, it's a whole thing that if you delve into it, it can be quite eye-opening. But when we sat there looking at each other, we were talking about, tackling this project. Um, it wasn't it wasn't that we were gonna do it. We knew we were gonna do it. It was how we were gonna do it. And Ellie and I we were both like, the reason we talk about pornography is not because I used porn. It's because I want to help other people. And the reason we talk about topics that are difficult, that we feel obliged to speak about, is because we want to help other people or bring awareness and, be supportive and show people that it's not just these organizations that are solely called Students for Life, that, that's what it is. And all power to you guys. But I do think that it's so important that there are people in quote unquote normal positions who can speak up and just say, hey, I'm a normal everyday worker. I go into my shop and I do my thing. And yes, I love cool antiques. And yes, I love designing. But at the end of the day, like, what matters most about what I do is my integrity and my character. And I'm going to stand for those in the middle of my workplace. And that's how I feel. And Ellie and I were like, well, look, like, if it's what we believe in private, why wouldn't we talk about it in public? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like, there's not a there's almost like there's an aha moment where you're like, yeah, what the heck? Am I trying to be two-faced? Am I trying to be a different person on the internet? And if
Sure.
I am, then it kind of makes everything disingenuine about what we've been trying to do for so long. It's like, I'm picking and choosing the battles that I fight because I feel like they're the battles that I'm supposed to fight. That's always the sort of thing, right? That people come back to you is like, you're not anti-abortion or pro-life. You just want babies to be born. You don't want to help babies. You don't want to help struggling moms. You're just someone who, whatever,
All the
every,
talking points. Yeah.
yes,
We
all
hear
the,
them all.
all the talking points that you get, all the DMs and all the letters and all this, I'm sure you guys understand. I know you guys understand. So it's just one of those things where I'm like, I would have this conversation with you in public. I would have this conversation at a dinner table. And I do. And let me tell you, I've lost friends because I probably talk about porn so much because I'm like, it's so bad. And then it's like, you guys don't understand. And people don't really like have the same, for me, it was like a personal thing. But then as you do more research, you realize, whoa, this is like an industry. This is capitalizing.
Yeah.
How is this a profitable industry? A multi-billion dollar industry, pornography. How, how are we not talking about this? It's evil. And then it kind of felt that same way. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Are you telling me that Planned Parenthood teamed up with Marc Jacobs and paid Miley Cyrus God knows how much money? And somehow we got people coming at us talking about how we're not giving money to these poor, struggling moms. And they're over here spending exuberant amounts of profit on just endorsements for messages that the world doesn't need, but it just feels counterintuitive. And it's sort of like, that old parable, you gotta pull the log out of your own eye before you call out the sawdust or speck of dust in another's. And it's so true because when you start looking at it from that perspective, you're like, whoa. I mean, everybody can be hypocrites, but my goodness, if you're a hypocrite for profit, there's a problem. Um, and I think, I could go on. Obviously, this can get super political and like, but yeah, I mean, I did see when I saw the Miley Cyrus campaign, I was so angered by the sexualization of abortion that it felt like it was the sexualization of abortion to me, which felt like just like peak evil to me, um, because you're taking what is the cause of so many abortions, which is like just sex as a base level, and you're using it to glorify the very thing. It just felt so wrong, and I remember. I don't think I'd been that angry. I felt really angry. I hadn't been that angry in a long time, and it just made me realize that the world that we're living in is so not held accountable and doesn't want to be held accountable, but they want to hold everyone else to account if, for whatever reason, we somehow step on their freedoms. If their freedoms hurt other people, they do not care. If those freedoms are,
Yeah.
horrifying in nature, it doesn't matter. They need to be allowed to do them. And trust me, I'm sitting in front of American flag. I'm probably one of the most American freedom of speech. I'm all for it. Freedom of expression. I find it so, so important. But when those two things begin to hurt other people, like physically hurt other people. And not only hurt people, but when you begin to profiteer from the pain and suffering of others in an industry that's unregulated, that has so much money invested in it, I think that's where I start to, the sort of tiger, comes out, and I'm like, this is wrong. And I have no tolerance for this. And we need to, stand up. And even by doing something as simple as, these podcasts and just talking about it, I find it so important because I hope it encourages someone somewhere to say, you know what, today's the day I'm going to stand up and say, you know what, this isn't just a funny joke we're making about porn. This isn't just a funny joke we're making about abortion. You see in,
Yeah,
culture that we just
absolutely.
joke and laugh about it. But no, this is something that I think is, indicative, going forward, that everyone has the ability and the role to stand up against injustice.
I do you want to host this podcast? I feel like I feel like you're so good at this. You could just join. We can be co-host, and we're fighting abortion together. The Miley Cyrus cake was absolutely disturbing. Of course, yeah, I see Gen Z posting it everywhere. It was one of the most disgusting things I have seen, and it comes from the demonization of motherhood and the dehumanization of babies. We have young girls who are manipulated and lied to by the abortion industry, and they hear
Mm,
that it's not a baby. It's just a clump of cells. There is no heartbeat. It's not alive. So a lot of my heart goes out to those young girls who don't even necessarily know what they're doing because they're lied to, and they find out at a later date what it is, because then they learn, maybe they get married and get pregnant and decide to parent the baby, and they say, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea." Um,
exactly.
and
Yeah.
it's a $1.3 billion industry, I think now. Planned Parenthood is. So I mean, they've got the money to push this stuff. We see it all over the place. They own Hollywood. They back politicians. It's pushed so heavily on our young people these days. And speaking of our young people, one of the last questions that I asked to all of our guests, because this show, I really wanted to encourage people to speak out about the abortion issue and really whatever other issues that they're passionate about, whether it is pornography, whether it is the sexualization of children, regardless of what their heart holds. I want people to speak out about it. So what would you say if you could say one thing to somebody listening to this who is wanting to speak out, maybe a little bit nervous? What would you say to encourage them?
Oh man, I love that. Speak out, speak out, speak out. Your voice is, when all else fails, your voice is what you have. And you can be, even though you might not think it, you might not be the influencer you think you should be, you might not be as well spoken as you think you might should be. But if you can use your voice for the good of others, it's worth doing. And I think everybody knows what the good of others is inherently. I think you have a conviction, it's in your gut. And if you deny that, you'll regret it the rest of your life. And I think there are moments in time where you might perk up and, straighten your shoulders and straighten your back, and you say, hey, this is the day that I say something. What you say might not be perfect, but it's what you're standing for that matters so much. And so I hope that is encouraging to everybody. It does not matter how perfect you are or are not. Just, speak up against injustice and speak out for sure, because it is the most needed thing in this world is your voice.
Christian, thank you so much for joining us on Speak Out. I could have continued this conversation for hours. You are one of the most fascinating people, and I am so appreciative that you're willing to talk about this topic. I know there are going to be a lot of people who are very interested to hear about it. Thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for sharing. Thank you to Ellie for sharing you with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you for working with Students for Life. And the awesome merch that we now have. My husband wears this sweatshirt too. I actually think this one might be his, but it's one that he really likes and he wears. So I'm so grateful for that. But thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Christine. Honestly, this was such an honor, and I'm really grateful.